The last thing I heard before the car door slammed was my own name, said like a punchline. "Nora, grab me a Gatorade, would you? Blue one." That was Trevor, my husband, sitting in the passenger seat with his sunglasses pushed up into his hair, grinning at me like everything was normal. Behind the wheel sat Dean, his best friend since 9th grade, and squeezed into the back was Marcus, his cousin, already filming something on his phone because Marcus was always filming something. We were 4 hours into a 9-hour drive to a lake house Dean's family owned, and we'd stopped at the kind of gas station you only see when you're too far from anywhere to be picky. One island of pumps, a flickering sign, a cornfield on one side and flat nothing on the other. I went inside because Trevor asked me to. That was the whole reason. He wanted a blue Gatorade, and he said his legs were stiff, and I wanted the walk anyway. So I left my phone charging in the cup holder and I went in. I remember the fluorescent hum inside. I remember the clerk, a teenager with a name tag that said TY, scrolling on his phone behind bulletproof glass. I remember standing at the cooler trying to decide between blue and the blue that was slightly more purple because I actually cared about getting it right, because that was the kind of wife I was. I cared about the small stuff. I thought that was love. I paid. I walked back out into the heat with the bottle sweating in my hand, and the car was gone. For a second, my brain just refused it. Cars pull forward to the far pump sometimes. Cars circle around. I looked left. I looked right. I looked down the long, straight road that went out to the horizon in both directions, and then I saw it, way out there, small and getting smaller. Dean's silver car, going the wrong way from where I stood. I laughed. I actually laughed, standing there in the parking lot with a Gatorade, because it had to be a joke. Trevor did this stuff. He'd hide in another aisle at the grocery store and jump out. He'd tell me the movie started at 7 when it started at 7:30 just to watch me rush. Little jokes. Annoying, sure, but jokes. So I stood there and I waited for the car to slow down, flip around, and come back with all three of them howling about how they got me. The car didn't slow down. It kept going until it was a speck, and then it wasn't even a speck, and the road was just empty and shimmering in the heat. My stomach did something I'd never felt before. It sort of folded. I remember my hand going to my pocket for my phone before I remembered where my phone was. In the cup holder, in the car. 4 hours from home, headed to a lake I'd only seen in Dean's pictures, with no wallet, no phone, and a warm blue Gatorade that Trevor never even wanted. I went back inside. Ty looked up. "You okay?" he asked, in the flat way teenagers ask things they hope aren't their problem. "My ride left," I said. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. "Can I use a phone?" He let me use the store phone. I dialed Trevor's number from memory, and it went straight to voicemail, and I dialed it again and again, standing there by a rack of beef jerky, while a trucker paid for cigarettes and looked at me sideways. On the 4th try, it rang once and then cut off, which meant he was declining it. He was looking at my call and pressing the button to make it stop. Then Ty's own phone buzzed on the counter, face up, and he glanced at it and his eyebrows went up and he turned it slightly toward himself so I couldn't see. But I saw enough. I saw a video thumbnail. I saw a car. And I understood, in a way that went all the way down to my feet, that Marcus had already posted it. My husband abandoning me at a gas station in the middle of nowhere was, at that exact moment, entertainment, content, something people were watching and reacting to with little laughing faces. I didn't cry. That surprised me later when I thought about it. I think I was too far past crying. Something in me had gone very quiet and very cold, and in that quiet a thought arrived, fully formed, like it had been waiting years for the room to go silent enough for me to hear it. He was always going to do this. You just didn't know when. I want to be honest about the years before that gas station, because the gas station wasn't the story. It was the last page of a story that had been writing itself for a long time. Trevor and I met when I was 23. He was charming in the way that works on you when you're young and a little lonely, which I was. He remembered things. He'd bring up something you mentioned once, weeks later, and it made you feel seen. I mistook that for care. It took me years to understand it was closer to inventory. He kept track of what you wanted so he'd always know what to dangle. We got married when I was 25. By 26, I had stopped seeing most of my own friends, because Trevor's friends were our friends now, and our friends were Dean and Marcus and their girlfriends, and their whole world ran on a particular kind of joke. Somebody was always the target. If you flinched, you were sensitive. If you got quiet, you couldn't take it. I learned to laugh a beat before the joke landed on me, to get ahead of it, to be in on it so I wouldn't be under it. Dean was the ringleader. He had money from his family and a boat and a way of making cruelty sound like fun, so nobody ever wanted to be the one who said stop. Marcus was the camera. He documented everything, and Trevor was the willing student who did whatever the older two thought was funny, because more than anything, Trevor wanted them to think he was the guy who'd go the furthest. The pranks got worse over 5 years. There was the time they told me the reservation was for a restaurant across town and let me drive there and sit alone for 40 minutes while they went to a different place. There was the time Dean convinced Trevor to surprise me by canceling a job interview on my behalf, calling the office, pretending to be my husband, handling my calendar, and telling them I'd taken another offer. I didn't get that job. When I found out how, Trevor said, "It was a bit, Nora. You would have hated that commute anyway." And I let it go, because letting it go was the only skill I had left. I used to lie in bed at night and take my own emotional temperature like a person checking a bruise. Is it really that bad? Other people have problems too. He's not violent. He doesn't cheat. He provides. I built a whole courtroom in my head where I was both the defense and the jury, and every night I found a reason to stay one more day. So when I stood in that gas station and felt the cold quiet come over me, part of what I felt was relief. Awful, guilty relief, because the decision had finally been made for me, and it had been made in a way I could never argue myself out of. He drove away, on purpose, filmed, laughing. There was nothing left to defend. The trucker who'd been buying cigarettes was still outside, doing something under the hood of his rig. I don't know what made me walk over. Desperation, mostly. I asked where he was headed. He straightened up and looked at me, this big, weathered guy with a gray mustache and grease on his knuckles, and I braced for the thing men sometimes do, the up and down look. It didn't come. He just looked tired and kind. "North," he said. "Cedar Falls direction, then east. Why, you stuck." "My husband left me here," I said. It sounded insane out loud. "As a joke. He's not coming back." The trucker was quiet for a second. Then he said, "That's not a joke. That's a man showing you who he is." His name was Roy. He had a daughter my age he didn't get to see enough, he told me later, somewhere over the second hour of the drive, and I think that's why he trusted me and why I trusted him. He didn't try to fix anything. He just drove, and he let me sit there and stare out the window at the fields going by. And when I finally started shaking, hours in, when the shock wore off and the real thing underneath came up, he handed me a napkin from the door pocket and turned the radio up a little so I could fall apart without an audience. I told him I had a cousin, Priya, in a city up north. We drifted, the way you drift when your husband makes it slightly too much work to keep other people in your life. But I had her number memorized, because I'd memorized it as a girl when we were close, and some numbers you never lose. Roy stopped at a truck stop with a bank of payphones that somehow still existed, and he gave me 2 quarters, and he waited by his rig, pretending to check his tires so I'd have privacy. Priya picked up on the 3rd ring. I said, "It's Nora," and there was this pause, and then she said, "Oh my God, are you okay? I saw the video," and I realized the whole thing had traveled faster than I had. It had beaten me across 3 states. "I need somewhere to go," I said. "Get here," she said. No hesitation. "Tell me where you are. I'll figure out the rest." Roy drove me another 90 minutes out of his way, which I know cost him, because trucking runs on time, and he was burning his. When he dropped me at the bus depot, he pressed $40 into my hand and refused to take it back, and he wrote his number on the back of a receipt and said, "You call me if that man or his friends give you trouble. I mean it." Then he climbed back up into his cab and pulled out, and I never saw him again, and I still think about him. Some strangers do more for you in 6 hours than the people who promised you forever. I bought a bus ticket with Roy's $40. I rode through the night, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, watching the highway lights slide across the ceiling of the bus, I made myself a promise that I've kept every single day since. You are done being someone's joke. Priya lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner, and she gave me the couch and asked for nothing. She was the first person in years to treat my presence as a gift instead of a chore. Those first 2 weeks I slept 10, 11 hours a night, this heavy, dreamless sleep, like my body was paying off a debt it had carried a long time. Trevor didn't call. That was the part that finished it for me, honestly, more than the gas station itself. A day passed. 2. A week. My husband of 5 years let me vanish and did not once try to find out if I was alive. I later learned that the video had gotten big enough that people were asking him about it online, and instead of worrying about me, he'd posted a follow-up, a grinning selfie, caption, "She's fine, relax, it's called a sense of humor." He didn't know where I was. He didn't check. "She's fine," was a guess he made so he could look relaxed for strangers. I filed for divorce 8 weeks later, using a legal aid office Priya found for me. Trevor signed without a fight, which I think surprised the lawyer and didn't surprise me at all. Men like Trevor don't hold on. They hold court. The second you're not in the audience, you stop existing to them. I took my old name back. Nora Vance. It felt like unbuttoning a coat that had been too tight for years. Now here's the part where, in a lot of stories, a woman lands somewhere soft and heals slowly. Mine wasn't soft. I was broke. I had no car, no credit that wasn't tangled up with Trevor's, and a resume with a hole in it because I'd let him talk me out of the last job I ever chased. The healing and the surviving happened at the same time, tangled together, and I couldn't afford to do one before the other. Priya knew a woman named Delphine who ran a small print and branding shop 3 blocks over, the kind of place that does business cards and shop signs, and the occasional logo for a bakery. Delphine needed someone at the front counter who could talk to customers without scaring them off. I could do that. I'd spent 5 years managing a man's moods. Managing a stressed-out client who needed 400 flyers by Friday was nothing. I started at the counter. $12 an hour. But I paid attention. That was the thing nobody had ever let me be at the counter of that little shop. Paying attention was suddenly a superpower instead of a liability. I noticed which layouts made people's eyes light up and which ones made them go, let me think about it. I noticed that half our customers didn't want a logo. They wanted to feel like their thing mattered, and a logo was just the closest thing they could buy to that feeling. I started sketching ideas on the backs of order forms for customers who couldn't describe what they wanted. Delphine caught me doing it, and instead of telling me to stay in my lane, she pulled up a stool next to the design station and said, "Show me how you'd fix this one." I didn't have training. I had taste, and I had reasons for my taste, and it turned out those 2 things together are most of the job. Within a year, I was designing. Within 2, I was the one clients asked for by name. Delphine gave me a real title and a real salary, and for the first time in my adult life, I had money that was mine, in an account that had only ever had my name on it. I remember the first time I saw 4 figures in my checking account. I sat in my own studio apartment that I paid for, with a lease that only I had signed, and I cried in a way that felt completely different from the way I used to cry. That was healing. Not a spa day, a bank statement. If you've ever clawed your way back from the bottom of something, you know the moment I'm about to describe, when the thing you built to survive quietly turns into the thing you were meant to do all along. Delphine wanted to retire. She was 66 and her knees were done, and she wanted to spend her days in a garden and not a print shop. She could have sold to anyone. She sold to me, on terms so generous they were basically a gift, payable out of the shop's own profits over 5 years, because she said, and I'll never forget this, "You didn't just work here. You saw what this could be. I only ever saw what it was. I renamed it. I turned it from a print shop into a real branding studio, small but sharp. And I stopped chasing 400 flyers by Friday and started chasing the kind of clients who needed a name, a look, a whole identity for something they were about to launch into the world. I hired 3 people, then 5, then 8. And somewhere in there, I met Elias. I want to be careful about this part because I don't want it to sound like the story where the broken woman gets fixed by a good man. That's the opposite of what happened. By the time Elias walked into my life, I was not broken. I was more myself than I had ever been. That's exactly why I could actually see him. He came to me as a client of all things. He ran a fund. Not the flashy kind, the quiet kind. The kind that puts money into small companies that make real things and then mostly leaves them alone. He'd bought a stake in a family manufacturing business that had a terrible dated brand, and someone had recommended my studio, and he showed up to the meeting having done his homework, which I noticed because most people don't. What I noticed most, though, was how he listened. He didn't perform listening the way Trevor used to, that nodding while loading the next thing. He actually took in what you said and then said something back that proved he'd heard you. The first time we disagreed in a meeting, he didn't get defensive and he didn't fold. He said, "Okay, walk me through why." And then he genuinely changed his mind when my reason was good, and I remember sitting there afterward almost dizzy because I hadn't known a man could do that. Just change his mind because you were right. No ego funeral required. We worked together for months before it became anything else. When it did, it was the least dramatic love story you can imagine, and that was the whole point. No fireworks, no games, no wondering where I stood. Elias was a man who said what he meant and then did it. And after Trevor, that felt less like romance and more like landing on solid ground after years at sea. He asked me about my past eventually, and I told him. All of it. The pranks, the interview, the gas station, the video. I watched his face while I told the gas station part, and he didn't say, "That's crazy," or "What a jerk," the throwaway things people say. He got very still, and then very quietly he said, he filmed it. Not a question. Just letting the facts sit there so I'd know he understood exactly how bad it was. Then he said the thing that made me marry him. He said, "I hate that it happened to you, and I'm glad it led you here, because I don't get to have you otherwise. Both things are true, and I don't have to pick." We married 2 years after that first meeting. Small. 20 people. Priya cried the whole time. Roy the trucker got an invitation because I'd kept his number all those years and finally used it, and he couldn't make the drive, but he sent a card that said, "Told you." He showed you who he was, and then you showed everybody who you were. Proud of you, kid. I didn't invite anyone from my old life. Not because I was still angry, because they simply weren't part of the life I'd built, and you don't owe your past a seat at your present. By the time 5 years had passed since that gas station, I was 33 years old. I co-ran a branding studio with a name people in the city recognized. I was married to a man whose fund had a reputation as the money you actually wanted, the smart, quiet money that could make or break a small company's future. Elias and I had started doing some work together, folding my studio's brand strategy into the companies his fund backed, so that a business he invested in got not just capital, but an identity. It made us a strange, powerful little two-person operation. He decided who got the money. I decided who they became. I hadn't thought about Trevor in a long time, genuinely. He had shrunk in my memory down to something the size of a bad review of a place I no longer ate. And then his name showed up in my inbox. It came as a pitch deck, forwarded by one of Elias's associates, flagged as a promising early-stage company looking for a bridge round to survive a rough patch. The company was called Verta, some app in the fitness space, and it was drowning, the way a lot of these companies drown, having spent money it didn't have on growth that didn't come. The founders were looking for someone to save them, and someone had told them that Elias Cade's fund was exactly the kind of patient money that rescues companies like theirs. I almost didn't read the founder names. I skim a dozen of these a week, but my eye caught it on the second page. Co-founder and CEO, Trevor Malden. Co-founder and head of growth, Dean Rourke, Trevor, and Dean. I sat back in my chair. I remember the exact feeling, and it wasn't triumph, not yet. It was more like the floor of my stomach dropping the way it had at the gas station, except this time in reverse. This time the drop was them falling and me watching from somewhere high up and steady. I did some reading. Marcus, it turned out, had faded out of their orbit years ago after some falling out. But Trevor and Dean had gone into business together, riding exactly the kind of confidence that had once made them think leaving a woman at a gas station was a good time. They'd raised a little money on charm, burned through it, and now they were down to the last months of runway, and they needed a lifeline, and the lifeline they were reaching for was attached to my husband's hand. I told Elias that night. I laid it all out at the kitchen counter, calm, and he listened the way he always listens, and when I was done, he asked me one question. "What do you want to do?" Not "what should we do?" Not "here's what I'll do." What do you want? because it was mine to decide, and he knew it. "I want to take the meeting," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Not to blow up at him," I said. "I'm past that. I want him to walk into a room expecting to be saved by a powerful stranger, and I want the powerful stranger to be me." Elias smiled slowly. "Then that's what happens," he said. "It's your meeting. I'll be there, but it's yours." We set it up carefully. The associate handled the scheduling so my name never appeared. Trevor and Dean knew only that they had a shot at a meeting with the Cade Fund in our conference room, and that if it went well, their company might live. They prepared for weeks, I found out later. Trevor bought a new suit. The morning of the meeting, I dressed the way I dress now, which is to say I dressed like a person who owns the room because I do. Navy, clean lines, my hair the way I like it, not the way anyone else ever wanted it. Elias caught me in the hallway and straightened nothing, because nothing needed straightening, and just said, "You've got this," and went ahead to the conference room to be there when they walked in. Here's how we staged it, and I'm not ashamed of the theater of it. Elias would greet them first, he'd sit them down, he'd make small talk while they got comfortable and hopeful, and then I would come in. I stood outside the conference room door and I listened for a second. I could hear Dean's laugh, that laugh I'd know anywhere. Too loud, working too hard. I could hear Trevor's voice, doing the thing Trevor does, the confident patter, the "we're so excited about where this is headed" energy of a man who has no idea the floor is about to open, and then I walked in. I want to tell you exactly what Trevor's face did, because I have replayed it more times than I'd admit. He was mid-sentence, something about user retention. He glanced up when the door opened, the polite reflexive glance you give when someone enters, expecting maybe an assistant with coffee. And his mouth kept moving for about half a second after his brain stopped, so there was this awful moment where the words trailed off into nothing, and his face just opened. All the confidence drained out of it like someone pulled a plug. His eyes went to me, then past me, then back, then to Elias, then back to me, doing frantic math that would not add up no matter how he ran it, because I wasn't a ghost from a gas station anymore. I walked in, and I sat down at the head of the table, in the seat that was obviously mine, and Elias, my Elias, stood and moved to stand just behind my chair, one hand resting on the back of it, quiet and solid, the way he always stood beside me while I did the thing I was there to do. That's what Trevor froze at, not just me, the whole picture. The woman he'd left in a parking lot, sitting at the head of the fund he'd come begging to, with the man who ran it standing at her back like the most natural thing in the world. Dean got it a beat later. I watched him get it. His loud face went slack and then a sick shade of pale, and he actually looked at the door, which told me everything about Dean I'd ever needed to know. "Nora," Trevor said, just my name, cracked in half. "Mr. Malden," I said. "Mr. Rourke. Thanks for coming in. I'm going to tell you what I said in that room, because it matters, and because it wasn't what the old me would have imagined saying in my revenge fantasies. I'd had years of imaginary versions of this. In the early ones, I screamed. In the later ones, I said something devastating and swept out. But by the time it actually happened, I didn't want any of that. I wanted something better than a good line. I wanted him to sit in the full, quiet weight of who I'd become without him, and who he'd stayed. I opened the deck on the screen. I went through their numbers, calmly, professionally, the same way I'd go through any pitch. And their numbers were bad. Not tragic, but bad. The numbers of two men who'd spent money to look successful instead of to become successful. I named it plainly. I pointed at the marketing spend and said, "You put most of this into looking big, none of it into being good." Trevor tried to recover. He's a performer, and performers reach for the performance when they're scared. "Nora, look, whatever you think about the past, this is business, and if we could just keep those things separate." "I am keeping them separate," I said. "If I were mixing them, you'd already be gone. I'm giving you the exact same read I'd give anyone who sent me this deck. And the read is that you built a company the way you built your marriage. You made it look good from the outside, and you never once did the boring, unglamorous work underneath that keeps a thing alive when the attention runs out." The room was very quiet. Elias didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence behind me said more than any threat could. Dean tried the other angle, the buddy angle, the come on, we go way back angle. "Nora, we were kids, honestly, that whole thing. It got blown way out of proportion. Nobody meant... I stood in a parking lot for 3 hours, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I found the truth doesn't need volume. No phone, no wallet, in the heat, and the 3 of you filmed it and posted it so strangers could laugh. And not one of you called to see if I got home. Trevor posted that I was fine as a guess because caring enough to actually know would have cost him a scroll of his own feed. Trevor flinched at that. Good. I'm not telling you this so you'll apologize, I said. An apology now is worth exactly nothing to me. I'm telling you so you understand that the woman deciding whether your company lives is a woman you decided was worth abandoning for a video. You made that call 5 years ago. I'm just the last person you'd want holding this one. Here's the part people don't expect when I tell this story. I didn't destroy them. I could have. Elias would have backed whatever I chose, and I had every reason and every right to look Trevor in the eye and tell him no, and watch his company die, knowing I'd been the one to let it. There was a version of me, a younger, rawer version, who would have needed that, who would have taken the win with both hands, but that version of me got left at a gas station and had to become someone else to survive. And the someone else I became doesn't need to burn a man down to know she's standing. That's the whole freedom of it. Revenge is something you want when you're still, somewhere deep, waiting for the other person to admit you mattered. I wasn't waiting anymore. I knew I mattered. I had 8 employees and a marriage and a bank account and a life that proved it every single morning. So I told Trevor and Dean the truth about their company, which was worse than any insult. I told them it wasn't a good investment. Not because of me, because of them. Because the fundamentals were rotten in the exact way I'd just described, and no amount of history between us changed the math. We're going to pass, I said, and I'll tell you why, plainly, since it's the only useful thing I can give you. You don't have a company. You have a brand with no substance underneath it, run by 2 people who've never in their lives done the hard part when the easy part stopped working. If you want this to survive, you don't need my husband's money. You need to become different men than the ones sitting in front of me, and that's not something a bridge round can buy. I stood up. Elias stepped back to let me. That was the whole meeting. Trevor stood too, fast. And for a second, the old fear flickered in me. The reflex, the muscle memory of a woman who'd spent 5 years managing a man's next move. But it passed as fast as it came, because there was nothing he could do to me anymore. He wasn't a threat. He was a man in a new suit that hadn't worked. Nora, he said, and his voice had lost all the CEO polish. It was just him now, small. I'm sorry, I am, for all of it. I think about the gas station. I do. And here's the thing I said. The thing I want you to hold on to if you're carrying your own version of a gas station. I looked at him and I said, I believe you think about it. But you're not sorry it happened. You're sorry it turned out to matter. If I'd stayed the woman who waited in that parking lot, you'd never have thought about it again. He didn't have anything to say to that. There was nothing to say. It was just true. I walked to the door. Dean was already gathering his things, not meeting anyone's eyes, and Trevor said the last thing he ever said to me, quietly, as I passed. He said, You look like you're doing really well. I stopped. I didn't turn all the way around. And I said, I am, not because of you, in spite of you. And then I walked out, and Elias followed a moment later, and the door closed on the 2 of them and their dying company, and the whole life I used to think I couldn't survive leaving. Elias found me in my office a few minutes later. I was standing at the window looking out over the city, not crying, not shaking, just breathing, in this loose, easy way I couldn't have breathed 5 years earlier. You okay? He asked. He always asks. It never gets old. I'm better than okay, I said, and I meant it in a way I could feel in my whole body. I kept waiting to feel triumphant, but it's not triumph. It's just quiet. He's not a monster in my head anymore. He's a guy in a bad suit who made a bad company. He shrank. Elias came and stood beside me at the window, and I leaned into his shoulder, and we watched the traffic for a while. You know what the worst part was back then? I said. It wasn't even the gas station. The gas station was just the day it became impossible to lie to myself. The worst part was all the years before it, when I did lie to myself, when I made a whole courtroom in my head every night to argue myself into staying. And now? He asked. Now there's no courtroom, I said. There's nothing to argue. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting out. You think freedom is going to feel like winning. It doesn't. It feels like the argument in your head finally stopping. Verda folded about 4 months later. I didn't have anything to do with it. They just ran out of runway, the way I told them they would, and the last I heard Trevor was working a normal job somewhere, and Dean had moved back in with his family. I don't check. I don't need to. They stopped being characters in my story the day I walked out of that conference room. I still think about Roy sometimes. The trucker. The stranger who told me, before I could even see it myself, that a man who leaves you as a joke isn't joking, he's confessing. I got to tell him, before he passed a couple years ago, exactly what his 6 hours of kindness turned into. He wrote back one last time. He said, "I just gave you a ride, kid. You drove yourself the rest of the way." He was right. That's the part I want you to take with you, whoever you are, sitting wherever you're sitting, watching this because maybe some piece of it feels a little too familiar. Somebody may have left you somewhere, in a parking lot, in a marriage, in a version of yourself you never chose, and it will feel, in that first hour, like the cruelest thing that could happen, like you're stranded, like the joke is on you and everybody's watching. But sometimes the person who leaves you at the gas station is doing you the only favor they were ever capable of. They're showing you, finally and unmistakably, exactly who they are. And once you actually see it, once you stop building the little courtroom in your head every night to argue them innocent, you get to do the one thing they never believed you'd do. You get to walk the other way. And you get to become the person who's standing at the head of the table when they come looking, years later, hoping to be saved. I was the one left behind at that gas station. 5 years later, I was the one they came to. And when Trevor looked up and saw me, and saw who was standing at my back, and saw the whole life I'd built out of the exact moment he thought he'd ended me, he froze. Because he finally understood what I'd known since the second his taillights disappeared down that empty road. He didn't leave me behind. He set me free. If this story hit something in you, do me a favor and let me know in the comments what part landed hardest. And if you've ever had your own gas station moment, the day it became impossible to keep lying to yourself, I genuinely want to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, real, quiet, and true. And I'll see you in the next one.